And maybe this is a good spot for me to stop and introduce Ambassador Hall, talking about crisis, crisis that is kind of there and somehow away from our consciousness, right? Crisis of people, millions of them, going to bed with empty stomachs. It's just absolutely incredible, right? That's happening. And what's incredible is that it's difficult to generate enough interest, motivation, enthusiasm to do something about something that we ought to be able to do something. It ought to be clear, right, that it should be thought of, it's a basic human right not to have to go to bed with an empty stomach, right? And yet we don't act as if this fact of millions of people doing so is the most egregious violation of human rights, as I would say, of any that we're experiencing today. And very little is, I think, done about it. Person who has done quite a bit about it, who's made his life work to do something about it, is Ambassador Tony Hall. I met him first time, I think, we were reminiscing about this, in the hills of Croatia, in a small place called Fužine, where he was participating in a group that was working on reconciliation at that time, and he was at the time living in Rome, and occasionally would come to these workshops for people from different parts of former Yugoslavia. And then I heard his story, and since those times I've been Ambassador Hall's fan. He was 3 times nominated for Nobel Prize and is a leading advocate for hunger relief programs and improving human rights conditions in the world. In February 2002, President George Bush asked him, a Democrat, to serve as the United States ambassador to United Nations agencies for food and agriculture. And prior to his diplomatic service, he represented 3rd District of Ohio in the US Congress for almost 24 years, their longest serving representative in history. And much of that time was not just attending to the interests of his district, but advocating for the hungry of this world. Ambassador Hall.
How are you? Well, thank you, Miroslav, and it's wonderful to be with you, and it's great to be here to again talk about a subject that I care very deeply about: poverty, hunger, and faith. As a matter of fact, I had to go to the Congress of the United States to find out about faith. I didn't know anything about God. Actually, I became a believer as a result of being a member of the Congress of the United States. We can talk about that a little bit later if you want to. It wasn't too long after I was in the Congress, and I became a believer, and a friend of mine said, I've got to introduce Tony to a group of people, and it was a group of all people from around the country, and he got so excited, he said, now I want to introduce my friend Tony Hall. He's a U.S. Congressman, and he's a Christian. And people started to, you know, kind of laugh, and somebody was giggling in the back, and an older man down front, he was looking up at me, and he was kind of squirming in his seat. And he just, after a while, he couldn't take it much longer. He just hollered up at me. He said, "Make up your mind, buddy. You can't be both." Today I want to talk a little bit about what's going on in the world, actually maybe what's going on a little bit in our own country. As we look around the world today, you know, before this day is up, there'll be 25,000 people that will die, and they will die of hunger and hunger-related diseases. And yesterday, 25,000 people died, and tomorrow, 25,000 people died. And almost half the people, it's probably 2/5 to, well, almost half, live on less than $2 a day. And at least 1 billion people today are facing malnutrition. In our own country, there are 49 million people that live in what we call food insecure homes. And it's not the kind of hunger, let's say, that's like in North Korea or Ethiopia or Sudan, but it's the kind of hunger where people in the United States are going to bed hungry 2 or 3 days out of every month without eating. And these are people, could be senior citizens, it could be women with children. Matter of fact, most of them are that. And these are people that once they get done paying for their rent or their daycare center or their utility bills, they run out of money 2 or 3 days, and they find themselves going to food banks or soup kitchens. 49 million. We haven't had those kind of numbers since 1960. What does God have to say about this? Well, as I read the scriptures, he has a lot to say about it. There's over 2,500 verses in the Bible that deal with this issue. And you can't pick up the Old Testament, New Testament, without reading about it. I mean, Miroslav talked about Matthew 25, but there's probably not a page in the scripture that you can't read about the orphans and the widows, the alien, women and children, the sick, the people with leprosy, the hurting, the lonely. God talks about them extensively. There's some great verses in Proverbs too. The verses that I really like in Proverbs, one is in 14, another one is in 19. It says that, and I'm paraphrasing now, it says, those that are gracious to the poor honor God. And another one says, those who are gracious, those who are good to the poor, those who work with the poor, lend to God. I find that kind of amazing because God doesn't say that many places. That if you do this, if you work with the poor, if you help them, you lend to me, you honor me. I got involved in this issue. It probably started when I was in the Peace Corps. I was in the Peace Corps for 2 years. And back in the late 1960s, 67, 68. But I really got involved in this issue of hunger in 1984 when Ethiopia was having this horrendous famine in its country, and they had lost 1 million people through hunger. And what had happened in Ethiopia is that they had drought. The drought turned into famine. Civil war started. The leader of the country wouldn't let anybody into his country, especially humanitarian workers and development assistance people, and they were kind of locked out of the country. Even the press was not allowed in for about 6 months. And then before we could get in, 1 million people had died. I felt that, you know, as chairman, at that time I was chairman of the subcommittee on international hunger in the Congress, and I felt that how can 1 million people die in one country? And I had been reading about it in a paper, but I needed to maybe see it, walk around in it, smell it, try to understand it. You know, we read a lot of things and we see a lot of things, but to really I mean, and we see it on television, but to really feel it, to understand it, I felt that it was incumbent upon me to take a look and maybe report back to Congress as to what I had seen. I was not prepared for it. And I went to Ethiopia, and I went with Mother Teresa's group, Sisters of Charity, and we were up above the capital, Addis Ababa, about 2 hours. And by light plane, we were in a very rural area, and we were to visit this clinic. The clinic was probably no bigger than this room, and it was in the middle of nowhere. And apparently, a lot of Ethiopians, it was on top of a plateau, had been walking for miles, some well over 100 miles. They sold everything to get there. Some had walked well over 100 miles. They thought that there was going to be blankets and water, food, medicines, and there was nothing except this little clinic that at best could maybe serve 5 people that day. They had a couple nuns, they had one doctor that was visiting, and when I walked into the compound, I noticed there were just thousands of people surrounding this clinic. As soon as I walked in, the doctor grabbed me and said, "Come with me outside, I got to show you something, because we can handle maybe 5 children out there that are dehydrated, and the rest are in trouble." And there must have been, at least among children, 3,000 children. So I went outside with him, and they thought I was a doctor. And, you know, the mothers are handing me, in some cases, their dead children. And in a matter of minutes, I probably saw 25 children die. I never got over that. I think about that often. And it was just one child after another dying of dehydration. And you know what happens when you haven't eaten for a while, your immune system goes down. And when your immune system goes down, you're very susceptible to all kinds of diseases that can come in. And they were just dying at alarming rates. And to see 25 children die in a matter of minutes I was stunned. And for the next 3 days in Ethiopia, that's all I saw. This tremendous amount of death. And I never got over that. I remember coming back on the plane and thinking that, you know, we do a lot of things in Congress really that don't amount to much. And I wanted to make my life count. And this is what I was going to do. I was going to start working on hunger. And I had remembered before I was going over there, I had a young man who was about my age that came in and was kind of a mentor of mine. And I was, as I had told you, I was a young believer, a young person that believed in the Lord. And I was studying and praying. And he said after a while, he said, this was prior to going on this trip, he said, "Don't you think it's time to bring God into your workplace?" And I said, "Well, how do you do that?" I said, "You know, I don't want to be a hypocrite. I don't really like politicians that, you know, wear religion on their lapel and try to shove it down people's throats, because that's a real turnoff. It's hypocritical, and I'd rather see a sermon than hear one. But I know what you're talking about. I know that I do need to bring faith into my workplace, but I want to do it in a way in which it is comfortable to me." So as I went to Ethiopia, as I'd seen this tremendous amount of death, as I began to read the scriptures about how much God really talks about the 2,500 verses about the poor and the sick, I thought, this is a way that I can bring my faith into my workplace and not shove it down people's throat. I don't have to tell anybody. All I have to do is just do it. And hopefully my faith will speak a voice of its own. So I began to travel, and eventually I became chairman of the committee, and of the whole committee, and that included domestic hunger and international hunger. And I ended up going to about 130 nations, traveling so many different places. We legislated, passed a lot of laws that have been in law for a number of years, and what happened was that I became so involved in this issue that I began to get letters and phone calls from my district in Dayton, Ohio, saying, you know, Congressman, we think that you think more about Ethiopia or Africa or Asia than you do about Dayton, Ohio. Who needs you? You need to come home and think about Dayton, Ohio. There was a perception that I was thinking more international than I was my own district. It wasn't a true perception, but in politics, perception is a lot. And if people have a perception about you, you either better change it or you're going to get stuck with that perception. So I got my staff together and I said, look, there's this perception, we need to change it. I love this issue. I don't want to lose this issue because I could lose my office here. I said, let's bring this issue back home to Ohio, and let's educate my constituency. Let's do some things back here, and let's find out what's going on here in Dayton, Ohio, and the suburbs and things in Southwest Ohio, which we did. And we started a gleaning program. You know, a gleaning program is you know, where you go into the fields and you pick the produce that's not picked by farmers. You know, there's 110 million tons of food every year that goes to waste in this country. 110 million tons. It wastes in the fields. It doesn't get picked, or it wastes in grocery stores or on the way to the wholesaler, or we waste it in our own homes. We have to throw it out. 110 million tons. So we decided through churches and various Jewish groups, secular groups, that we would go out at harvest time and we would find some farmers that really wanted to help us, and we had so much food, it was unbelievable. And we did this for about 15 years. We had gleaning programs at harvest time that picked up fruits and vegetables, and we had so much food we didn't know what to do with it. But we had a system where we gathered it and took it to a central warehouse, and I had 66 food banks and soup kitchens, and the word went out. Today we got strawberries, tomorrow we got apples, now we got whatever was corn, whatever was being harvested in Ohio at the time, which was a lot of food. And then we started a senior citizen feeding program on the weekends during the cold winter months when a lot of them are shut in. And that lasted about 20 years. And then we did a immunization program for kids, and we did a pickup of food programs from country clubs and restaurants and motels, and I had a huge military base in my backyard that we gathered, and we got the people involved. Because I felt that I had to bring the issue back home, because I felt it's incumbent upon elected officials to educate your district. You know, sometimes elected officials, you know, not sometimes, they should lead and not wait for the wind to change. It's incumbent upon them to lead and to educate and to direct. Prior, when I had first got elected, I did a poll in my district because I wanted to know how my people felt about issues. I said, you know, so we listed a number of issues: the deficit, the jobs, whatever the issues were in those days, the budget, taxes, environment, etc., poverty, hunger. And I said, rank these issues. Well, hunger, poverty ranked last. Out of 15, I think it was 15 or 20 issues, ranked last. We did these programs, and before I left office after 24 years, I did this poll again. Same poll, asked the same questions. Hunger ranked number 2. So you can change your constituents' minds, and you can change for good. And you can bring an issue back home and make things happen. And that was really very, very exciting to me. right now, I run a nonprofit organization in Washington, D.C. It's called the Alliance to End Hunger. And it's a little organization. We're growing. And what we do is we build political will. We do a number of things. I believe that hunger, poverty, development assistance, but especially the issue of hunger, the only way to solve it is you've got to bring everybody into the room. It's not just government. This belongs to private enterprise. It belongs to the people of faith. And it belongs to the nonprofits. So our organization has corporations, large corporations, from Cargill to Land O'Lakes to other corporations, to the Catholic Relief Services, to World Vision, to Save the Children, and then on the religious side, the faith base, we have the Islamic Relief, a lot of Christian churches, and two major Jewish organizations. So we bring everybody into the room, and we work on creating political will. We do that in a number of ways. We do polling. We work on corporations, working with nonprofit organizations overseas in our own country. We build national alliances in other countries, especially in poor nations. You know, I spent a lot of time with congressmen and senators trying to get them to do things, to be better men and women for this issue, talking to them about this issue, sometimes lobbying them. And we're going to start doing the same thing in other countries, in poor nations, because working with civil society, some of the civil society in very poor nations, for them to learn how to lobby and for them to be advocates is something very new to them. So we're teaching civil society how to advocate. And then the other thing, I'm trying to reconnect, and we've started this, congressmen and senators and governors and mayors back to their district about hunger so that they can have hunger-free communities. And I'm sick and tired of elected officials just running to be reelected. I want them to be leaders again. I want them to be interested in this issue. This issue is, if it's not in the top 5 issues of our world today, I don't know what isn't. And as we poll on this issue, it's one of the top 2 or 3 issues always with the American people. The American people are way ahead of our elected officials on this issue. So what I'm going to do, or what I am trying to do, is get the congressmen and senators to go back to their district, get acquainted with their food bank people, their faith-based people, their corporations, and call a meeting. And we have a 14-point program that we really started back when I was a congressman and chairman of the committee, that we are asking them to, in some districts around the country, to start doing hunger-free communities. That what would it take to make your district hunger-free? And if you could be able to say to your people that nobody's going to go to bed hungry again in my district, can you imagine what that would do for the morale, the economics? I think people would want to live there. I think corporations would want to invest there. So we're gonna take congressmen, senators, and mayor and get them reacquainted with their district, especially the hunger areas. And we're trying to build hunger heroes. That's pretty much what the Alliance to End Hunger does. I'm the executive director of it, and that's what I do now. In conclusion, I just want to say that there's a lot of overwhelming things going on in the world today when it comes to hunger and poverty, but I had the great chance to be with Mother Teresa a number of times in my lifetime. I even went to her funeral, but I remember the first time I met her in Calcutta, when I met her, she grabbed my hand and she said 5 things to me. It was pretty much what Miroslav said. She quoted right from Matthew 25. She said, never forget, never forget. She grabbed each one of my fingers. For the least of these. For the least of these. That's that's 5 words she said to me. Then she took me downtown in Calcutta. We went to this place. I can't remember exactly where it was, but it was in such a congested part of Calcutta that people were living on the sidewalk and sleeping on the street. I mean, it was overrun with people. And I'm thinking, I'm chairman of the select committee on hunger, and I must have blurted out something to Mother Teresa. I said, look at this. I mean, I'm supposed to be chairman of the hunger committee. I'm not even sure I can handle this block with all these people here. She said, where do you start? And she didn't say anything, and she went, and there was a man lying in the street. She got some men to pick him up, take him home to her hospice-like place, and she began to wash him off and love him and hug him like she always does. And she came back to me later in the afternoon, and she said, kind of to answer my question, she said, do the thing that's in front of you. She said, you can't always, not everybody like you can come to Calcutta, but if everybody did the thing that's in front of them, what's going on in New Haven? What's going on in Boise, Idaho? What's going on in Dayton, Ohio? If everybody did the thing that's in front of them, do the thing that's in front of you. Probably half the stuff we do in Congress we wouldn't need. So that was her point to me, and that's my point to you. Just do the thing that's in front of you. Okay? Good to talk to you.